Hello everyone, welcome to Homemaking Radio. I know it's a holiday, but homemakers still have to keep going, and even though it's supposed to be a day off, it's only wonderful because we are there making it happen. And today, I hope you are doing as best you can in your present circumstances and that you have great plans for improvement. I have a friend who wrote to me her goals for next year, and there were goals of her home improvement, and then she had something to do with her self-improvement, which I thought was absolutely brilliant, of things she wanted to improve about herself, from bad character habits to wanting to lose some weight and improve her health, and wanting to do more things that would improve her talents or use her talents and do more artistic things. I thought that was brilliant. I'm Mrs. Sherman, and I'm broadcasting from the guest room in the manse, which is empty during this season. This is Christmas Eve, and 3 days ago we had our first day of winter, and then we had an ice storm, and I don't believe I've ever been in an ice storm. I find it peculiar that every place in the U.S. had an ice storm. How does that happen? And it was very interesting, and it was different. I went outside and I thought it was just sprinkling, raining, and the icy bits hit my face, and I thought, this is different. And then whatever I stepped on didn't look like ice. It just looked normal. The sidewalk looked normal. The step looked normal. But when I stepped on it, it was ice. The chair on the front porch had ice on the seat. The table had ice on it. The doorknob had ice. Everything was frozen. The mailbox had ice all around it, and which I find it very interesting. Should I develop some ice fashion? That'll be different, wouldn't it? So today I think that maybe you could use a little bit of company. I have some things to read to you. I've been thinking about you the last 3 days and thinking about how to come and talk, and I hope that I can live one of my New Year's resolutions and be here more often. Now, some of you need to leave a missive for your descendants. I'll talk to you about how our parents and grandparents kept little journals and diaries so they could keep track of when they planted something, or when something came up, or when something started, or just their plans. And I think that it's really important, those of you who know how to do videos, leave some videos for your descendants on how to behave, how to cope with certain things that'll happen. You might say something like, now after you've been married for a while, this might happen, and this is what I did, or this is what you might do. Everybody's different, but here are some things to think about it. One of my best books that I ever had was the Fascinating Womanhood book, because she told what to do when things went wrong. And it wasn't everything, but it was just the general principle to have confidence that things will get better. And it was things like I told you last time: don't let other people's gloom rub off on you. And that is a hard one, a very hard one for women today. Now, the first thing you have to do, if you want to come to my class today, is take care of your appearance. So I think it's very important because, it's a tribute and a worship to God to take care of your appearance. Isn't there a scripture that says, glorify God in your appearance? And why shouldn't we? Didn't David say, what shall we give to him for all his benefits towards us? Well, that is something we can do. We can improve our appearance every day, prepare ourselves every day, because he's with us, walking beside us as we work. And if you are aware of that and understand that we have an obligation to give him a good name, and as homemakers, of course, we don't want to give homemaking a bad reputation. It began to get a very bad reputation in the 1950s, as some women were not looking after their appearance, and then giving the impression that homemaking was just a way to let down and not care anymore. but not everyone did that, but the few that did kind of ruined it for the reputation of homemaking. Now, so go and take care of yourself the best you can. I decided to look a little more sparkly today. And what is the point of letting these kind of things lay in your closet or in your drawers for years and years? Because waiting for something nice to happen. The best thing you can do is wear them at home. There's more where that came from. You might be able to buy something better years later, and I'm going to just go ahead and wear my things. And so now, after you do take care of yourself, I think it's a really important time you're going to spend in front of the mirror. I know we're critical of people little girls, spend a lot of time in the mirror, but they're just getting to know how their hair works and how they look and what a pleasant expression is. And there's probably not anything bad going to come of it at all. And if we don't tell them to go stand in front of the mirror and look at themselves and clean up their face and clean up their hair, then they won't care. And so the other thing is, now that you're all dressed up and ready to go, is put your apron on. I would suggest a clean one every day, although our modern housework is not near as dirty as it used to be, and you had to have a clean apron, but today you can wear one quite a while. And also, I talked to you about thrift last time, and in order to be thrifty with the expense of laundry at home, it still costs something even if you're doing it at home. Just try not to get things so dirty. We need to get out of bad habits. You don't need to wipe everything on your shirt or your apron. You don't need to. Someone mentioned cloth napkins, yes, and we used to lay them beside our plate and we used them again. But we were careful not to get them too messy, because we're going to have to use them again and face that napkin again. So I have learned the best thrift is to be more careful about cleanliness, and then you don't need to get your apron so dirty, and you don't need to wash it so much. And then the other thing is that I thought the other day was, before going to bed at night, think about the person, even if you're living alone, think about the person who will be waking up to the house the next day, and be nice to her. So even if you're living alone, be nice to yourself. Wake up in the morning as though you are in a fine establishment, a fine hotel. I always like to think of the book I had years ago. Don't know where it is now, but it was about the women who lived in the Empress Hotel in Canada. Back in the 1800s, you could rent what used to be the maids' rooms up on the upper floors, and they would rent them by the month, and it provided a foundation of money for the hotel, and they depended on these people living there. And so then they would go down to tea in the morning or afternoon, where it would be in the lobby, and they also met people down there and helped young people meet other people, and recommended people for jobs. They had a kind of a network going with these, they called them dowagers. But I got to thinking about waking up to the house as though you were going to go downstairs to the lobby and have tea. And so you get that all out, get it ready so that when you get up you can walk over there and do that. And I think it's also important when you get up to stand up straight and walk through the house, because you might get up feeling a little bit down or discouraged right away, knowing the work that's ahead, or maybe some family problems or something like that. But if you'll get up and stand up straight and walk through the house, somehow it changes the balance of your thinking and can give you a little stability. And I was recently looking up stretch exercise and poses for people who had anxiety, or there was another word for it, anxiety and lack of motivation and depression. And depression is a good word because it has the word press on it or depress on it. And the thinking about depression is that it does depress your breathing. It depresses your circulation. It depresses your even your posture, because people who are depressed tend to slump a little bit more. So you can look up some exercises, and often can read a description of how to do them. And one of them, of course, is just sitting up straight. And it says if you can just sit up straight, it alleviates some anxiety. And just sit up straight for a little bit and breathe normally. And so you might want to look up some things like that. So be nice to the person who will be waking up in the house the next day. Now, I also thought of something yesterday when I was going to walk through the house, get my cup of tea and walk through the house. But of course, I still have on my sleeping clothes and my robe. And I'm thinking, now I realize why the Victorians had what's called a morning dress. And I've looked up the patterns for them, and saw them to be just a lightweight, casual looking dress, maybe made of calico or some kind of cotton with a little print on it that you'd only wear at home. And I see now why they had it, because you didn't have to traipse through the house in your robe and your nightwear. And I'm really considering doing that, and so that you're not really fully dressed, you haven't really gotten ready for the day, but you just want to slip on something that's not your pajamas, and later on get dressed again. And I had this custom lasted clear into the 1980s, because I remember some of the elderly women that got up and went in the bathroom and put a little house dress on, but they didn't do much else. They just put that on, and then they did some morning chores, and maybe made breakfast. But after that, they went in the bathroom, they bathed, they fixed their hair, and they changed, because they might have to go somewhere. Somebody might come to their house. And so now I'm starting to understand the idea of the morning dress. And so now I want to go on to some of the things that as I have been homemaking now in my vital years, that I have come to understand. And they all amused me. And one was pacing. I mentioned pacing. It's often described in some of these old books by Dickens and by Elizabeth Gaskell and by Jane Austen. People that had something on their mind would pace back and forth, and how awful I feel when I say, why are you pacing? Quit pacing. Go sit down somewhere. Because it is natural to pace. It somehow stimulates these cells in the brain, and you can start to solve problems. And the other thing was talking to yourself. Oh no, I'll never do that. I'll never talk to myself. But as I've gotten more vital, when I am alone and there's no one to hear me, I will say something to myself just to hear it and remember it. Okay, I'm putting my teacup over here today. It's on this little stand. Or I will say, I put the stamps over here. And now I know why they did it. Because as I get more vital, it becomes important, especially if you've spent some days alone. I know Mr. S had to go out and was on a trip with his brother, and I spent the week talking to myself just to figure out where I was going to leave something and not lose it. Okay? So the other thing that I started to really appreciate was letter writing, because on a certain day of the week they would sit down and write a letter and get it, get their thoughts on paper and get it sent. And they weren't like me, where I wait till there's a big stack of them. Remember in the book Christie, where she was being taken to someone's place in the mountains, and the postman was going to take her on his postal route. And he said, I have to hurry and get the mail on time, or it will stack up. And he had something like 2 letters. And she said, I had a hard time thinking why 2 letters would be accumulated mail. And anyway, I do tend to accumulate it. And behind me, you will see your Christmas card. And if I ever get them written, I'll be so happy. And I chose ones that said season rather than Christmas so that I could continue sending them all year if I have to. Another thing that when I want to talk about appearance for the home, now I don't suggest you wear a prom dress in the house. A lot of people will mock me and say that that's what I'm talking about. I'm not really talking about that. But one thing about appearance, when we were growing up, many of us grew up on homesteads back in the day, and in the 1950s, we were still proud enough of our heritage, of our father and mother, and of our homes. We would have wanted to die if someone ever thought we were in poverty. That was the biggest insult you could ever have. Because if you were in poverty in those days, it meant you were not using your resources properly, or you were wasteful, or you were an old drunk, or there was always a reason for being in poverty, and nobody had to be in poverty if they had firewood, if they had food, if they had clothing, and they had transportation. No one thought they were in poverty. And many of us grew up not really wanting things that appeared to be rich because we thought that we were rich, and but we would have died rather than have been accused of being in poverty. So we were careful what we wore. We didn't wear torn things. We didn't wear things that had stains on them. We didn't wear things that were totally faded out. We would often get these boxes of used clothes passed from homestead to homestead, take out what we wanted. We always took out the very best. We girls took out the clothing that had the fancy buttons on them or anything sparkly because it made you look a little better off. And we would never, ever have wanted anyone to help us. We were embarrassed if anyone tried to give us things. If you forgot your lunch and you were somewhere and you forgot your lunch, you didn't beg. We never, ever would have begged. It was against the rules, and our parents never allowed it. You don't beg for anybody. You don't even ask anybody for a glass of water. It was that strict. And it was part of making your family have a good reputation, your father have a good reputation, and it was good manners. It's bad manners, they said, to make anyone feel that they have to do something for you. It's okay to accept help if you break your arm or if you fall on the ice or something like that. But this poverty thing was just something that was so different than it is today. And we had some visitors from overseas one time in a rather rich country, and after they left, they said they learned a lot because the people that we had taken them to visit didn't appear to even care about wealth or riches, and yet they were very well off. They had plenty of food, they were confident, they had comforts in their homes, and but they weren't bragging about the brand of their car or the brand of their clothing, or their conversation was never about things. And when we had that family here, we would go for walks in the farm fields and talk about the weather, talk about life, find out what was in bloom, and we would talk about things that they were interested in, ask them about themselves. And they were impressed because they said we didn't really hear people talking about their financial circumstances and money. Americans don't talk about it too much, about money too much. In fact, you'd be hard pressed to find out how much money anybody made in their jobs, and how much they paid for anything. So, as it's just a necessary evil, I guess. And so I had to also talk to you about something, and I want to just bring my little example here. I had a hard time this Christmas finding everything because in the room where we had put everything, when we had the windows changed out, I never got it organized back again till something else had happened that I had to do. And I mentioned years ago how to simplify your holiday decorations, and one of the things that I really like is these new ornaments that you just clip on things, or you clip it on the tree, you clip on, it's easier to remove. Remember back when we had the old hooks, I knew I was done for when one Christmas I got sick, and after Christmas for days and days I could not undo anything, so I put the little tree, it was artificial, in the box with the hooks and ornaments still on them. And then the next year the ornaments had the hooks had rusted, and I knew I couldn't use those again. But how in the world did these people do this for years and years and generations, whoever invented that anyway? The little you can always glue a little clothes peg or clothespin on the back of something you've made and clip it on. And so anyway, I just decided one year I was just not going to do that, and I just got out bowls of ornaments. And I like these because I know it looks like it's blue there, but I don't know where that's coming from. But these were some that I got years ago that looked like chocolates. And there were brown and silver ornaments, and the colors have changed. It's not just green and red all the time. And so I enjoy having these in a bowl because they look like chocolates, and then I don't have to worry about taking them down again, putting them away. They just pour it back in the box. And the other thing was, when we were really young, we did a lot of things from foil, and we would take apart the egg cartons and make bells out of them, but by putting the foil around them, and they became silver bells. I'm not sure what we used as, I think we probably put a little bit of string or something in there to hang them with. And we used foil for many different things. We would make our own icicles out of the foil, cutting it, making our own icicles. And many other, we made stars, we made, just lots of things out of the foil, and a lot of things out of construction paper too. And so it was quite simple. So I want to read a little bit to you today, and then I want to pursue some more of my notes. And so I'm going to start out with, and if you've got something you need to do, you go ahead and go do it, because I don't think I have anything else to show you. And so this is Tea with Jane Austen, and she has a section called Tempest in the Teapot. And the physicians didn't like tea at first. They didn't like it. It was competition for their apothecary. It was competition for their medicines and chemical cures. And it's said here, I read this to you before about tea. Some Britons viewed tea's growing popularity with disfavor, sneering at it as unmanly, untraditional, and un-British. Brewers were especially alarmed by the new beverage. By the mid-1700s, tea was threatening to replace ale and beer on British tables, and I read somewhere that it did. It had replaced it. Fearing loss of sales, brewers tried to drum up opposition to tea, even lobbying the government to raise taxes on it. One particularly indignant fellow wrote a furious letter to Gentleman's Magazine, claiming tea caused feebleness, cowardice, poor blood, and dissatisfied servants. He topped up his diatribe with an objection to how tea was taken. Were it entirely wholesome, as balm or mint, it were yet mischief enough to have our whole populace used to sip warm water in a mincing, effeminate manner once or twice a day, which hot water must be supped out of a nice teacup, sweetened with sugar, biting a bit of nice thin bread and butter between whiles. Perhaps he was a brewer. There are some people, when they see happiness sitting on the post, have to knock it off. The debate over tea has continued in one form or another until the present day, when science finally seems to have proved that tea is, after all, as one poet called it, the sovereign drink of pleasure and of health. So I just thought you might be interested in that. We always have to have our tea, don't we, in our little thing. And then I'm going to read from you Stepping Heavenward, because these are good lessons in character. And in the home, I think that's where the character is supposed to come from. In all the years in public school, most people will tell you they didn't learn anything about character. And as I mentioned, character is, there's a long list of things that are character qualities. And I would suggest reading some of the passages that I have given you over time. And I'm thinking particularly of Philippians 4:8, Galatians 5:22, and is it First Peter 1, where it talks, add to your faith virtue, knowledge, brotherly love, and kindness. And also it's full of it in Proverbs and Psalms, in being people of courage. And there's so many words that go into character that you never learn. And I believe that in homeschooling we had a book on reading comprehension, and each one was a story of someone with some kind of good character, and we had to identify what character quality that was. Everybody has character, but it's the difference between good and bad character. This is called Stepping Heavenward by Mrs. E. Prentice. The story of a young girl clear into adulthood and her discovery of character. And she went to see on March 17, I believe it was the 1800s, 1831, she went to see the minister's wife. Let me see if I can find it here. And so she went to see the minister's wife, and she said, I was determined not to tell her any of my troubles, but somehow she got the whole story out of me, and instead of being shocked, as I expected she would be, she actually burst out laughing. This is a young girl that's having trouble doing the right thing at home, and being cross with her brother, just normal things. She actually burst out laughing. She recovered herself immediately, however. Do excuse me for laughing at you, dear child, but I remember so well I used to flounder through such a needless anxiety, and life looks so different, so very different to me now from what it did then. What should you think of a man who, just having sowed his field, was astonished not to see it once ripe for the harvest, because his neighbor's, after long months of waiting, was just being gathered in? Do you mean, I asked, that by and by I shall naturally come to feel and think as other good people do? Yes, I do. You must make the most of what little Christian life you have. Be thankful God has given you so much. Cherish it, pray over it, and guard it like the apple of your eye. Imperceptibly, but surely it will grow and keep on growing, for this is nature. She's talking about how young she is when she says of what little Christian life you have, what little experience you've had in it, is what she meant. But I don't want to wait, I said despondently. How many of you remember that? Being about 16 and someone says, you have a lot of potential, and you'll learn after a while, or you'll get more mature, and you're sitting there thinking, how can they talk to me like this? I have just been reading a delightful book full of stories of heroic deeds, not fables, but histories of real events and real people. It has quite stirred me up and made me wish to possess such beautiful heroism that I were a man, that I might have a chance to perform some truly noble self-sacrificing acts. This goes along with what I've been trying to tell young people, both boys and girls, about the importance of being home until you get your own home, until you're married with your own home, because that in-between stage of being single is not borne out anywhere in the Bible. In fact, those who actually went away from their home got into some kind of trouble. We see that in the Old Testament, a lot of the sons of even the prophets who went their own way. And how much, once you get grown up and your parents have invested so much time in you and helped develop your character, it'd be nice to have you around to enrich their lives and enrich the home until you have your own home. So here they are. Here is the temptation as you read these stories, and you want to go somewhere and do something brave and noble. But it is a brave and noble thing to stay home. I dare say your chance will come, she replied, though you are not a man. I fancy we all get more or less what we want. Do you really think so? Let me see then what I want most. But I am staying too long. Were you busy? No, she returned smilingly. I am learning that the man who wants me is the man I want, I said. I said, I want to be very, very good. I should like next best to be learned and accomplished. Learned and accomplished. We talked about this in our ladies' class on Thursday about how important it is to admire people because they are good fathers, good husbands, good sons and daughters, just kind and good and helpful, and not admire them because they are so smart. And from the time children are little, we're always wanting to tell them they're smart. And it might not be a good thing because then comes this success philosophy on how to be successful. And we will study that sometime in the Bible because that word is in there. I want to be perfectly well and perfectly happy, and a pleasant home, of course, I must have, with friends, too, who love me and like me. And I can't get along without some pretty tasteful things about me. But you are laughing at me. Have I said anything foolish? If I laughed, it was not at you, but at poor human nature that would fain grasp at everything at once. Allowing that you should possess all you have just described, where is the heroism you so much admire for exercise? That is just what I was saying. That is just what troubles me. To be sure, while perfectly well and happy in a pleasant home, with friends to love and admire you— "Oh, I did not say admire," I interrupted. "That was just what you meant, my dear." "I'm afraid it was, now that I come to think it over." "Well, with plenty of friends, good in an uncommon way, accomplished, learned, and surrounded with pretty and tasteful objects, your life will certainly be in danger of not proving very sublime." "It is a great pity," I said musingly. "Suppose you content yourself for the present with doing in a faithful, quiet, persistent way all the little homely tasks that return with each returning day, each one as unto God. Perhaps by and by you will thus have gained strength for a more heroic life." I always loved that scripture that says, "Whatever thy hand finds to do, do with all thy might as unto the Lord and not unto man, for ye serve the Lord God." And there was one in Ecclesiastes and one in the New Testament, very, very similar, about being quiet, minding your own business, and working with your own hands. You do have some duties, my dear, I suppose. "Oh, yes, I have the care of my own room, and my mother wants me to have a general oversight of the parlor. You know, we have but one parlor now." "Is that all you have to do?" "Why, my music and drawing take up a good deal of time, and I read and studied more or less, and go out some, and we have a good many visitors." "I suppose, then, you keep your room in a nice ladylike order, and that the parlor is dusted every morning, loose music put out of the way, books restored in their places?" "Oh, now I know Mother's been talking to you." "Your mother has told me nothing at all." "Well, then," I said, laughing, but a bit ashamed, "I don't keep my room in nice order, and my mother really sees to the parlor herself, although I pretend to do it." "And is she never annoyed by this neglect?" "Oh, yes, much annoyed." "Then, dear Katy, perhaps your first act of heroism tomorrow should be the gratifying of your mother in these little things, little though they are. Surely your first duty next to pleasing God is to please your mother, and that would be pleasing God, of course, and in every possible way to sweeten and beautify her life. You may depend upon it that a life of real heroism and self-sacrifice must begin and lay its foundation in this little world, wherein it learns its first lesson and takes its first steps." "And do you really think that God notices such little things?" "You know, whether a boy or girl, you are needed at home, even if your parents are not keeping you busy every minute and they don't have they haven't figured out great plans for your future. Does not mean you don't belong there and that you're not needed there. You are needed as part of the family. You are needed because you are precious to them. And sometimes I know the impact of it won't come to you till you have your own children. And that's too bad, but you are extremely valued at home. And when they warn you about leaving, they are very, very serious. And if you are wise, you will follow their good counsel. And do you really think God notices such little things? My dear child, what a question. If there is any truth I would gladly impress on the mind of you, it is just this, that God notices the most trivial act, accepts the poorest, most threadbare little service, listens to the coldest, feeblest petition, and gathers up with parental fondness all our fragmentary desires and attempts at good works. Oh, if we could only begin to conceive how he loves us, what different creatures we would be. I felt inspired by her enthusiasm, though I don't think I quite understand what she means. I did not dare stay any longer, for her great host of children she must have had her hands full. March 25. Mother's very much astonished to see how nicely I am keeping things in order. I was flying about this morning, singing and dusting the furniture, when she came in and began, "He that is faithful in that which is least," but I ran at her my brush and would not let her finish. Really, don't deserve to be praised, for I have been thinking that if it is true that God notices every little thing we do to please him, he must also notice every cross word we speak, every shrug of the shoulders, every ungracious look. I should add, rolling of the eyes. There's still adults that do that. And they displease him, and my list of such offenses is as long as my life. We'll continue that tomorrow. I don't like to leave off these stories on a sour note, and it always pains me because I want to see her do well. And so now I'm going to read out of Simple Social Graces, because we're going to be eating, aren't we? And on Christmas Day, everybody likes to eat, and it's usually the mother that makes it possible. Even if all she does is plan it, and other people carry it out. And it was talking in here, this section on eating, and she's named the chapter Soul Food. And she talks about our bottom line society has sacrificed the very intangibles we grope for. The immeasurable otherness of aura and aesthetics that former generations revered. They understood why frills like crisp table linens, flowers, and sprigs of parsley were not frivolous, and how the sensibilities children learned or failed to learn at meals could steer a nation's fate. You know, if we could stay away from the trends and the interior decorating trends and start looking at things as why they're there. Why did they have certain types of curtains? Why did they have tablecloths? You know, tablecloths make things quieter on the surface of the table. Just make the whole meal quieter. Now, I don't like to wash them, so what I do is I keep some very nice, clear, shiny plastic on top of them, and then I just wipe that. It still makes it nice and soft. They understood why linens, flowers, and sprigs of parsley were not frivolous, and how the sensibilities children learned, or failed to learn, at meals could steer a nation's fate. Without the living cultural memory of that intensely domestic past, we are left trying to spice a stew that needs something we cannot name because it has become so foreign to our modern palate. I sampled a small vicarious taste of this something through a 90-ish lady I met at a retirement home I visited 20 years ago. As a child, she asked her father why he always changed his collar and cuffs, which used to be separate from shirts. Remember, there was the collar and cuff. It was a round container, and we used to call them hat boxes, but they were also collar and cuff boxes. Why he used to change them when he came home from work, even if they weren't dirty. This was the prescribed custom of the time, but her father also explained why it was no empty formality. Wearing a collar and cuffs as fresh and white as the dining room tablecloth was, first, a mark of respect to her mother, and the food she carefully prepared on a modest budget. Many years later, that elderly lady I met wondered whether her own grandchildren would have divorced so quickly if they had experienced family dinners that fed not only the body but the soul. She explains this throughout here, and I did get a glimpse of it with my parents and grandparents, how those meals were so different. So I'm going to read a little bit more about it that I liked, and about the food and about the meal times. So if I can find out where I was here. Those of us who had some living link to our Victorian-era relations witnessed this sad decline of meals and its implications for the gradual fraying of family life. When I was a child, my grandmother had a kitchen that seemed a wonderland of simmering soups, fresh-baked scents, and carefully selected produce waiting to be transformed by her magic hands. She measured ingredients by instinct instead of using the scientifically precise cups and scales that always remind me of high school chemistry classes. Everything she made drew acclaim, or at least satisfied sighs, from the husband and children, no matter how often she served the dish. And later on she'll say, rather than measuring or even having recipes, they felt them. They could tell by the way it was putting together what it needed and what was going on there that would make it good or not so good. And it told how they made I couldn't find it, but there was a section here that was quite fascinating, how they would buy one chunk of something and use it many different ways. And so they would, slice it themselves and whatever it was. The Lost Art of Home Cooking. The Victorian mistress of the house was expected to master the art and science of cookery, to have a thorough working knowledge of herbs, spices, meats, fruits, breads, and vegetables. And it said here, kitchens were places where you knew you were nourishing your family, and so you were doing it for them, not just a job you had to do. And this is one of the whole problems with homemakers getting discouraged, is they don't realize that this isn't just checking something off of your list, but doing it for the good of your family. Now, I am going to Wives and Daughters, because I have not read to you for a while out of this, but in this is going to tie in to the thing that I'm going to talk about young people at home. And I'm going to be reading the something out of the chapter on Osborne's secret life. And there are many people that are living that. Osborne hardly ever came home. No one knew where he was. They didn't know his address. No one knew what he did all day, and he wouldn't tell anybody. And doesn't that sound familiar? Many people today, suffering, very, very young people, just decide they're going to walk out one day and they'll say, I'm going to see a friend. Well, who's your friend? You don't know. Everybody knows who the mother's friends are. We all know who the father's friends are. We don't have any secrets, but you can't find them. You can't find the grown child, and it's a real problem for the parents who are very concerned. And so that's why I'm saying that if you have to keep everything a secret, just like Osborne did, then there's something terribly wrong there. And we find out later on that Osborne, although he was a kind and loving person, was not right in the way he worried his family. And so Molly, she's taking care of Mrs. Hamley, and so Mrs. Hamley says to ask Roger where Osborne is. I want to see Osborne. And so when Roger came home, she says, your mother has been wanting some news of your brother Osborne. She told me last week to ask you about him, but I did not like to speak of him before your father. She hardly ever named him to me. I don't know why, for me, she used to talk of him perpetually. I have seen so little of her this week, and I think she forgets a great deal now. Still, if you don't mind, I should like to be able to tell her something if she asks me again. He put his head between his hands and did not answer for some time. What does she want to know? Said he at last. Does she know that Osborne is coming soon, any day? Yes, but she wants to know where he is. I can't tell you. I don't know exactly. I believe he's abroad, but I'm not sure. But you've sent Papa's letter to him? I've sent it to a friend of his who will know better than I do when he's to be found. And some of these children that leave home are being lured away by someone else, and you can't even send a letter to them, I have heard, because they don't give you an address, and but they have to come home to get their mail. So don't encourage them to get an address, because they'll all come home to get their mail. You must know that he isn't free from creditors, Molly. You can't have been one of the family, like a child of the house almost, without knowing that. For that and for other reasons, I don't exactly know where he is. And at this point, I think she becomes quite troubled, and she said, maybe someone's trying to use him or get money out of him. I will not tell her that. You are sure he will come? Quite sure, but Molly, I think my mother may live some time yet, don't you? Dr. Nichols said so yesterday when he was here with your father. He said she had rallied more and that she had than he had ever expected. You're not afraid of any change that makes you so anxious for Osborne's coming? No, it's only for her that I ask. She did seem to crave for news of him. I think she dreamed of him, and then when she wakened it was a relief for her to talk about him to me. She always seems to associate me with him. We used to speak so much of him when we were together. I don't know what we should any of us have done without you, Molly. You've been like a daughter to my mother. I do love her so, said Molly softly. Yes, I see. Have you ever noticed that she sometimes calls you Fanny? It was the name of a little sister of ours who died. I think she often takes you for her. It was partly that and partly that at such a time as this. One can't stand on formalities that made me call you Molly. I hope you don't mind. No, I like it, but will you tell me something more about your brother? She really hungers for news of him. So, if you've watched the movie series Wives and Daughters, you'll see what happened there. And although it wasn't anything bad, he had not remained at home, and he had not told his parents what he was doing, and that causes a lot of problems. And then we have a problem with young people who decide they want to do something, and they say, well, the timing is right. Oh, the timing is just right. I'm just in the middle of, I'm just between deciding this and deciding that, and I finished this project, and so the timing is right, and this opportunity came. So you have to remember the saying that I had the other day is don't let urgency and haste determine your decisions or timing, because timing can be there, but it does not mean the decision is right, because you have to base your decisions on what is the right thing to do. And you have to think about, I was talking to a friend of mine about Jane Austen, and she was telling me that she liked the Jane Austen books because they told of decisions that were important. The conflict often came on decision making about a future mate or a move or a job. It was based on your grandfather and your grandparents, and then the future. How would it affect the future generations? And I'd like to get her on here sometime to talk about it. So don't let urgency and haste and timing determine your decisions. they have to be right no matter what. And if you're talking about, the timing is right, then you're saying there's no other time, and the opportunity won't be there unless I take it right now because the timing is right. Don't ever use that as a reason for doing something. And if it's right to do, it will wait. And so I'm talking about major life decisions. Now, I'd also like to talk about a little bit about the adults of my day when we were growing up, and just looking back and kind of observing how they handled life. And if you had been there with me back in the 1950s, and some of you who are vital know what I'm talking about, and that is that it was not always a comfortable life. There were tragedies. There was a lot of unfairness going on, and there was a lot of rudeness, and there was a lot of opportunities that had to be missed. And there were great disappointments. And I mentioned in my book about how we'd get all ready to go to town, which is such a treat when you live way out in the wilderness. And then the car would not start, or it would stop somewhere, and we had to all get out and go home again, and crying all the way. But my mother always tried to compensate it by making us something nice to eat, or doing something with us. And also we were often uncomfortable. It's not like today, if you don't like where you are, what you're doing, or what you're reading, you just change it. In those days, it wasn't as easy. But we didn't spend time analyzing it all to death, and what did they do? Because a lot of them had hard lives before we were even born. A lot of them had hard lives and disappointing family life. Even some of those people were born in the 1920s, and the ones that had us, they came from a very hard life, and but they rarely spoke of it. And my father had been in the military, would not refuse to talk about it, just wouldn't talk about it. If anyone asked him about it, he clamped up. And so it reminded me, I told you last time, of that poem, Leave It at the Door. Don't bring in the bad news to your family. But they didn't spend any time analyzing it as a bad life. But they did. I got to thinking, okay, what did they do? They went for long walks. They go outside and cry a long time, maybe leaning up against a tree. And they didn't discuss it they all were suffering probably from the same bad lives that were hard because they grew up during the Depression or during a war, or had loved ones taken away from them. But they had a couple things they did, and I'm trying to think about it and watching in life that they really enjoyed. They enjoyed those boxes that came through that had the used clothing in it, and always a pile of books. And they read and read and read and read, and they read books, they read stories for hours on end. Time that probably our generation would have spent analyzing the situation, talking it and over-talking it and overthinking it, and having a meltdown. They would read books. And the interesting thing about books, in those days, you still had to be careful. Mostly they were wholesome, but not always. One thing about having characters in a book is that an author can make the character do what they want them to and make it turn out the way they want it to turn out. And in those days, most of the stories were like that. And then they also had diaries. And these diaries were kept to keep track of things, to keep track of life, especially during long winters when there was a sameness of the days. And so when you couldn't go anywhere because you were snowed in, and there was nothing to go anywhere to because everything was shut down, you went to your books or you went to your diary and you wrote letters home. And my mother said sometimes she'd write a terrible letter home complaining, and then she would throw it away, and because you just wouldn't have let it out. And but they had books to read, and they wrote in journals. And I just was analyzing that, and then they were very, very creative. They found ways to do things with brown paper. They found ways to do things with anything that they had, old boxes. I talked to you about thrift in the home last time. Well, we used to have containers that things came in, food particularly. And there was the clear cellophane containers or plastic containers that had a lid on them, and we would reuse them. And instead of having instead of buying boxes for things to sort things and even craft materials, we would use we would use used grocery things, a box that some food came in, or a jar with a lid on it, or some of those. Sometimes you could get packages of stuff and there was a little drawer in it, and they'd had little sections for all the whatever was in there, and we would put things in there, and we kept things orderly that way. They wouldn't last forever, but some of the modern organization stuff doesn't last forever either. And so let me see. Let's talk a little bit about refinement in a group, and about some of the habits that people have that we probably need to pay attention to. And one is that, there's nothing new under the sun, and people don't get better and better. Every person has a responsibility to start from scratch and learn good character. And but we still have adults who are rude and crude, and some will never be refined. They will not. They don't recognize it as necessary. They don't think what they're doing is wrong or saying is offensive. And if it is offensive, they don't care. They say that's the other person's problem. So they're not going to change. So instead of getting frustrated with that, you'll have to learn how to reroute their conversation. Some people are very skilled at that. And by calling attention to something else that will break their train of thought. And some people are very good at that. I wish I could learn it better. I'm just too I'm too soft on people, and then later on I'll realize, my goodness, they took over the whole conversation talking about some dumb thing, and I would rather someone else correct them. But I would suggest that you can reroute them, the conversation, by asking a question or calling attention to something else. However, there are some people I've noticed that I saw a lady once years ago who became quite upset that someone was talking rudely and crudely and in a group. I don't even know what it was. And she just got up and she said, "Oh, look, it's starting to rain." And she went out and opened the door or something, and the person got up and looked and then got right back down and started back on their track of thought. So some of these people we're not going to be able to change, but if it bothers you and it sends your blood pressure up, I would say do your best to just avoid the company of that person. We're not obligated to keep company with people who continually foul the air. So there are some people too that like to ruin a fine gathering or a day. If it's a special day or someone is happy, they figure out a way to ruin it by the things that they say. And notice that most of the etiquette problems that I have mentioned over the last few years on these broadcasts have been problems of the tongue. And that's why I say my favorite scripture is put a seal on my lips, because we have to limit the words that come out of our mouth in order to keep from stimulating some of these people's imagination or minds into further conversation. And so there are some people too that I mentioned this because I just thought of it the other day. That, remember I told you that it was just it would have been a terrible thing for any of us to make anyone think that we were poor. We did not want anyone to say we were poor. It was an insult. We did not want anyone to say that we were poor. And we did not want anyone offering us anything. It was such a different atmosphere. And now everywhere you go, you see the sign, ask for help, ask for help. Like in your store, don't reach for the top shelf, ask for help. But that is prevalent in our society today is that don't be ashamed to ask for help. Well, poor people used to have so much pride they'd not ask for help because we were do-it-yourselfers and we did not want anyone to think that we were poor. But there are some people around that might be around you, and I was thinking about this the other day because I've kind of watched, and this one came to memory, and it must have been when I was a child, but there were people that would talk to you for a while and then listen so intently, listening for an offer, listening for something that some time you would give them or something you would do with them or something you would give to them. They're listening for it. And they'll make a comment that's real, sounds very normal, like, that's a really nice dress you're wearing. Did you sew it? Oh yeah, I did sew it. Oh, I'd like to know how to sew. And then next thing you know, someone's offering to show you how. And that's fine. That's wonderful. But when it becomes where you notice that this person is doing it all the time for everything they can get, everything, then I think the homemaker especially has to really bide her time and really be careful of that. So what they can say is, yes, I'd like to know how to sew. Oh, well, I hope you find someone who will teach you. But it's always good. I mean, my heart is big. I want to teach someone how to sew. And I have taught a lot of people how to sew, but it's hard work, and not very many of them will continue it. And but then there are those that just kind of hang on every word, waiting for something, waiting for you to say something that they can jump on in order to get something. And most of us don't do that, so we respond, and next thing you know, we're busier than ever doing something for someone else when we need to be taking care of our own children or our own grandchildren. But anywhere that you find, there will be people like that, and they're written out about in stories. I've seen them in Jane Austen. I've seen them in Charles Dickens, and so that'll just be another character for your novel. So, ladies, I hope that you found a few things to do. You don't have to agree with me. We can still be friends. And I hope that you have a wonderful day tomorrow. Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope it's warm for you, not too uncomfortable. I wanted to tell you about that window. The new window that I got has changed the temperature in this house and the whole atmosphere in the house. I used to have a lot of dreams about sleeping under a tree, or sleeping in a field with leaves on top of me, or not being able to find my blanket or something like that. And it's amazing, because if you get those old windows that are 60 years old, they're really thin and they have condensation all over them, and you're asleep, I think it affects your feeling that you're camping out. And I have not had one of those dreams since I got that new window, and the whole atmosphere of the house has really changed. It's very nice. It's insulated, and I only have a few more windows to go. And so a lot of you that live in old houses, you know this. So anyway, I hope that you'll stay close to Christ, and I hope to see you again really, really soon. I hope you have a wonderful day, no matter what happens to you, no matter what someone says, no what life throws you. Just go back to what you wanted to do and be determined to enjoy it. So I'll talk to you later. Bye.